Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. So this is the prequel to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's based on the book by J.R.R. Tolkien, and is stretched out into 3 films that will play out throughout the next 3 years. It's about Bilbo Baggins, who has been selected by Gandalf to go on an unexpected journey with about 12 dwarves who need to reclaim Lonely Mountain from Smaug the dragon, who took over a dwarf kingdom which belonged to Thorin, who is the leader of the dwarves who have come to go on this journey with Bilbo and Gandalf. Smaug has had this kingdom for 60 years, but they've decided now is the time that they can come and reclaim it from Smaug, take back their riches. They're going to go on this quest to do so, and they need Bilbo Baggins because they need a burglar. And so they go on this quest and encounter many things along the way, including orcs and goblins and Gollum. I've kind of wanted to see a Hobbit movie for a while, and I always thought when I saw the Lord of the Rings films and when that was done, they would obviously make 1, maybe 2. I never thought 3. The effect that the Lord of the Rings had on Peter Jackson, and those are so well directed and so well told, and he has such a flair for visuals and visual effects throughout those films, and he's just an incredible director throughout those films. But the thing is he made the extended editions, and after the extended editions and after Lord of the Rings, he hasn't made a movie that's under 2 hours. They're all like Lonely Bones or Lovely Bones, who cares, that movie was awful, and King Kong. They're just way too long. There's way too many loose ends. Peter Jackson's got such an attention to detail. I think it's to a fault. Like, he just doesn't know what to cut. And in a lot of ways, this film feels more like a director's cut or an extended edition. And I really wish this was just simply following Bilbo's journey to Smaug rather than including all this other stuff that's making it more of a prequel to Lord of the Rings than it really was. It was more of an isolated story. Obviously he gets the ring, that's in there. There are obvious references to Lord of the Rings because, you know, they're written by the same guy, and this is technically a prequel, but this is upping the prequel ante. It feels like someone's nudging you and going like, hey, remember that in those movies you liked? This is like that. It actually kind of hurt the film in a lot of places. There's some plot developments that really should have happened a little more naturally. The way they introduce certain things to the audience, specifically the thing I have the most problem with, and I think it was kind of a huge mistake, was telling the story of Lonely Mountain through older Bilbo. And really the main reason they included those scenes seemed to be just to have more of a connection to the previous Lord of the Rings films. And I didn't really think there was much of a narrative reason. It hurt the film, mostly because you need the story of Lonely Mountain to come from Thorin, because it's essential to understanding Bilbo's character arc with the dwarves, and how the dwarves' Lonely Mountain is their home, like Bag End is his home. And when you have that character arc that goes throughout the film with him, especially towards the end, it would have been more important and meant more for the character and meant more for us as audience members and kind of reach more for us and given us more of an arc to follow if the dwarves had told us. But since older Bilbo tells us and starts off the film, I didn't really understand why they did that. Was it to mimic kind of the structure of the original Lord of the Rings films and have kind of a cool introduction, like in The Fellowship where Cate Blanchett does the introduction about the rings, and have this instead about Lonely Mountain? All the stuff that was in the novel The Hobbit had a hard time developing because you had all this other stuff that needed to happen with the necromancer who will eventually become Sauron, and all that stuff, like with the prequel-ness to the Lord of the Rings, I just did not like. I wish we could have just had kind of a fun adventure, which The Hobbit really lends itself to, and anytime it was just The Hobbit and the book The Hobbit, I think this film was really good, but anytime it wasn't, it felt really unnecessary. I didn't really understand the point of it. And although this film really moves, I mean, for a film that's almost like fairly long, it's not too much shorter from the original Fellowship of the Ring, and it does feel like they're expanding a film well beyond what it should be. I think this film really should have been like 2 hours, but instead it's 169. I like the character of Radagast, and I love Sylvester McCoy. I mean, he was the last Doctor of the original Doctor Who series, and he's a great actor, and I love that Peter Jackson put him in a movie of this size. But Radagast just didn't have enough to do with the story to really be in there. He wasn't a major character in the Tolkien stuff to begin with. In the original Lord of the Rings film, they cut out Radagast completely. I think that was really a good thing because there wasn't much of a narrative reason for him to be there. And all of the previous Lord of the Rings films, despite having a ton of detail, were far more to the point and moved. When you read about how they cut out things, it made sense. And this film is like the opposite, where he's putting too much in. Like, there's other Tolkien stuff he put in and things like that. I wish he really just hadn't have done that. I still like this film. It's still one of the better blockbusters I've seen this year. Absolutely. It's one of the better $100 million films I've seen this year. I mean, not as good as Avengers or Skyfall, but it's still a fairly decent one. Even though it's got a lot of flaws, I still quite like it. He overdid it. He overthought it. This is like kind of the problem with sequels and prequels, is they lose the point and the reason we all fell in love with these characters, and the reason we fell in love with these movies is because they were good movies, you know? It's not because we want erroneous details and way too many characters. And I think the Fellowship of the Ring, one of the reasons that we were all so drawn in and everyone got so into the various other films is because we had such a connection to those characters. But I don't feel like, because we're going in so many different areas, I don't feel like I have much of a connection with these characters, and I don't really get into it, honestly, until they leave Rivendell. And when they leave Rivendell, I feel like, oh, hey, this is the real Hobbit movie I want to see. And there's a real arc with, like, Bilbo not wanting to be there, and like Thorin not really liking him and all this stuff, and that should have been built up before. It feels almost like we have a lot of different short stories matched together, and if you've read The Hobbit, it's like one isolated, very well told, lighter toned story, and this film doesn't necessarily reflect that. It's like trying to make Lord of the Rings fit in to The Hobbit as well, that tone, and they really should have looked at it as The Hobbit is something different. It's a different kind of story, and they don't really approach it that way. With like a different tone movie like The Hobbit really should have been, rather than mushing it into the tone of Lord of the Rings. As I was waiting to see The Hobbit, I thought, why isn't this getting Golden Globe nominations? Why isn't this being hailed the same way as the Lord of the Rings? And I was kind of curious. I was like, well, maybe they're full of shit and they don't know. But unfortunately, I have to agree with them. The thing about the Lord of the Rings films, even though they were blockbusters, even though they cost $100 million, or big, mass appeal, populist movies, they were really amazing visual motion pictures. And this film feels more like a blockbuster, $100 million big spectacle, than kind of a film that grabs you and drags you in and is a greatly told story. And that's kind of unfortunate, because I would have thought The Hobbit would really lend itself to that kind of filmmaking. But unfortunately, this movie doesn't really. So if you have seen The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to.